Now for part 2 of the fatal or fundamental flaw of Overwatch 2. Again, game design is hard, especially an amazing game like Overwatch 2 that has so much variety. In part 1, we talked about our noob heroes acceptable. We talked about counterplay, whether it's good, whether it's bad, and how it needs to be implemented. And then we also talked about the potentially flawed hero design of Overwatch 2 heroes. Today, we're going to be moving on to part number 2. We're going to be talking about, are specialists acceptable in a competitive game, and when are generalists okay and when are generalists bad, dynamic versus static designs, and dynamic versus static abilities. And finally, maybe the most important or most interesting discussion, which is what makes a meta and how our impressions or even just content creator impressions of a meta have snowball effects that affect the entire community, not only perception of the meta, but the perception about the quality of the game. As always, these discussions are very nuanced. I had a lot of community discussion in this video, so please let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you enjoy this video, give it a like, and I'll see you in the next one. And while we're talking about specialists here, hybrids are fine as long as they have weaknesses or gaps in strength. Are specialists acceptable in a competitive game? Now, if you follow Spilo, he makes a really good argument where the reason why 5v5 has so many issues for the tank role is because a specialist can exist when you have something diversifying your portfolio. Now, we talked about this in depth in the fixing tank video recently, the one with the Rubik's Cube thumbnail. So I recommend you going back through, and I'll give you my opinion, the TLDR. But the TLDR is the problem with that mindset is that it is reliant off of your teammates picking the character that complements your strength particularly well. Not completely, right? Because having a Sigma or having, let's say, a Roadhog as a Winston player, right, is not exactly what you need, but at least it's another warm body to pull attention. So that is true. But regardless, one of the issues is that having some other player to pull attention, and what it does is it means that you can have more specialists in the environment because you can have other characters that complement that strengths. Let's classify Zenyatta as a specialist. It's not exactly true, but it's kind of sort of close to being true, right? Zenyatta's more of a pokey range character, and so on. Now, if you guys follow Overwatch League in the past, or OWCS, or Contenders, or followed even the pro meta at any point in the last 4 or 5 years, you notice something. When Zenyatta is being played in pro meta, especially in Overwatch 2, or in what is Zenyatta paired with? Yeah, we'll define what a specialist is in a second. What is Zenyatta paired with a lot of the time? Think about it. Brig, right. A lot of times dive and Brig. Why? Well, Brigitte exactly complements the specialist, semi-specialist Zenyatta and what he struggles with, which is support and peel. The ability to defend versus dive. Right? Sometimes Baptiste, but those were more caricature full-on spam comps, right? So you had characters that could complement, and even tracers, right? Where a tracer can help defend the Zenyatta versus dive by controlling off angles. So the question is, are specialists acceptable in a competitive game? I actually think that they're totally fine in games. I think strengths and weaknesses can complement each other. I think there are certain games, like chess, for example. What is the weakness of the pawn? What is the weakness of the rook? What is the weakness of the king? What is the weakness of the knight? You guys get what I'm saying? When you're playing a game of chess with multiple moving parts, you not only is it acceptable to have specialist pieces, it is more engaging to have specialist pieces. Because when you control the board, there are a lot of different approaches that you can do. You guys get what I'm saying? When I'm playing, you guys have heard of Age of Empires 2, right? This is a game I bring up a lot because I used to really enjoy it when I was a teenager. And Age of Empires 2 is an excellent example of counterplay through specialists done at a really, really high level, where you have elephants that get countered by monks, that get countered by scouts, that get countered by that get countered by knights or pikes, which get countered by archers, which get countered by skirmishers, which get countered by, and what you have is you have this multiple faceted, complicated web of counters, and most civilizations have multiple options. They can control multiple of these facets and form this delicious meal from these ingredients, right? And being able to make all these choices, and it's situational, it's map depends on what you're playing versus, and there's a lot of different things. And even goats, right? Like goats was a composition that obviously got boring to watch, but was a great example of a lot of characters with a lot of weaknesses. Ryan and his lack of vertical mobility. D.Va and her lack of direct her lack of direct pressure. Zarya and the inability to close the distance. Lucio and his lack of ranged pressure. Zenyatta and his need for appeal. Brig and her lack of range. And you have these characters that were able to all complement each other's weaknesses and form something that was truly unbelievably oppressive because they all complement each other. Now, the problem with specialists and using these chess, Age of Empires 2, and so on examples is the difference between chess and Age of Empires and Overwatch is that Overwatch, you are the pawn. You are the monk or the scout or the rook. You don't get the opportunity to control all the pieces. So if you're forced into a niche supportive role to where you are the one being countered, it doesn't always feel that good to get the pat on the back and be like, it's okay, you're serving your role. Some people like that, most people don't. As a single player, what if your team also doesn't hedge your bets? You can't control, you can't control what your teammates make. Imagine if you're playing Age of Empires, but you could only control making one unit. And so when you make monks to counter the elephants and they go scouts, you're like, hey guys, we need some pikes. Hey, pick the pike character, Jack. You can't do that. You can't do that. So what ends up happening is that you have, right, exactly, stacked strengths, but that they don't complement your wings. You're reliant off of your teammates to hedge your bets. And this isn't just the tank role. That's something that we talked a lot about, the tank role with the transition to 5v5, one of the big problems with it. But this applies to damage and support as well. Having two supports is better than one. But if your backline on freaking King of the Hill or Flashpoint is playing on a Zen or Zen Mercy, and they're playing Ball Sombra Tracer, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have a real bad time because both of those characters being double poke doesn't make it better in those situations. Now, generally people over-exaggerate the importance of counterpicking and counterplay and so on, but it is important. You go Moira Lucio on Circuit Royale or Junkertown First Point, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have a really bad time. So the problem is that the problem with the characters? Is that a problem with the design of the kit? When swapping isn't the fun choice. I think swapping is something that sometimes needs to be encouraged. I don't think there's a way that we can get around it. But it should feel like rarely forced. What if your existence is just to absorb but never outplay? So what about playing into specialists? All right. Well, so let's pivot things for a second. Have you guys ever played into a Widowmaker on Lijiang Tower Control Center? Have you guys ever played into a Reaper on Shambhala Monastery Third Point? They might as well not exist. Like, you forget that they're there. Have you guys ever played into a Malga on Lijiang Tower Control Center? Or a Junkrat? Have you guys ever played into a Widowmaker on Shambhala Monastery Third Point? You might as well not exist. It's unbelievable. There's no option. Now, part of that is a map problem. Part of it. Can I say, dang it? There you go. But a lot of it is playing, it's not just playing with the specialists, but playing versus the specialists can be very oppressive and force you to play a swap game even sometimes. What it does is it simplifies the gameplay loop, where if you're willing to swap to Sombra or Wrecking Ball, you will win, probably. If you're not, you will lose. What are you going to do? And this kind of goes back to the counterplay options. There's nothing you can do. And that is not fun. It basically becomes a battle of the wills and not a battle of the skills.
I got a bingo.
Congratulations, chicken. You guys get what I'm saying? And so this is such a big problem here, right? Is that specialists can be very problematic when it comes to game design. Because if you look at the hero design, we did this a while ago. Look at the specialists here, right? You would try Malga and Orisa as specialists, right? You definitely describe Bastion and Reaper as specialists. Widowmaker definitely as a specialist. Mercy as a specialist, right? Now, it basically just becomes a Russian roulette, even with a map. So here's a question, guys. Are all specialists created unique? And what defines a specialist? Because here's a great question, chat. Is Winston a specialist? Is Winston a specialist? Is Ana or Zenyatta a specialist? Wait a second here. Wait just one gosh darn second. How Winston is absolutely a specialist, at least to an extent. And the same thing goes with Zenyatta, absolutely a specialist, at least to an extent. What's the difference between a Winston Malga specialist and a Zenyatta Moira specialist or a Mercy specialist? What's the difference? I would say there's two big differences. And we really got to pay attention to these. One of these we've already talked about. When I say specialist, it means a character that has a very simple gameplay loop and does only one thing. Malga busts tanks. Winston dives squishies. Usually doesn't really play. How easy is it to execute on their specialty? That is true. That's 100% one of them to Priest. Whereas a loop of a Moira specialty, what Moira does best or what Mercy does best versus what Zenyatta does best, is big in terms of how easy it is to do that. Malga versus Winston, right? But that's not the only thing, right? It's not the only thing. Because a Widow is very difficult, but she's obnoxious. So skill alone clearly isn't the only metric. Let me answer the question for you guys. How would you describe Widow as a specialist versus Zenyatta as a specialist? You guys get what I'm saying? Bastion as a specialist versus a character even like Soldier or Ashe. The answer is not just the counterplay and the level of skill. It's that, like everything else, there is nuance. There is a layer to specialism. Specialists are not problems unless they become caricatures. There is a spectrum of how far a character can go. There were people even just a second ago disagreeing with me calling Zenyatta a specialist. Why? Because Zenyatta is not totally incompetent in close to mid ranges. He's not good, but he can perform, right? He's got tools. He's got his melee, and he does decent damage, and his ult's pretty good up close. And Winston is not great versus tanks, but he's got the mobility options, and Bubble is an okay brawl tool, right? So basically what you have here is that saying not all specialists are created equally. Sometimes specialists are absolute jokes. Bastion and Widow are the ones that come to mind, where they really just do the one thing, and that's all they freaking do. Like, whereas a Winston and Zenyatta are, definitely a specialist, but there is a lot of flexibility with how they play, not to mention the skill expression. So they're less specialized, yes. Yes, they're less specialized. So here's the rule with specialists, okay? If we're going to have two rules. One, there needs skill expression. If you're going to have a specialist, it must be challenging to play the character. It cannot be easy. Otherwise, you have a character that becomes a caricature that everybody has to play around or everybody has to play versus. The other rule is that you never, 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 never want to create a character that is a Widowmaker. You don't want to do it. And you never want to create a character that's like a Bastion or a Malga. Characters that only can do one thing. They are the caricature of specialism. They're not just especially good in certain aspects, but that is the only thing they can do. They are extremes. So we have to avoid the extremes, and we have to implement skill. Ana, Junker Queen, Venture, they are specialists. Venture is absolutely a short-range specialist. But they have mobility and dive options and a little bit of range, a little bit more range. So they make them, there's aspects of Venture that are frustrating, the burst damage, and they're easy to counter and so on. But it's okay. It's not the end of the world, right? They're not the worst thing that we have. Junker Queen, definitely more of a brawl tank. But she's got some speed. She's got some range. She's got some mobility choices. Is Tracer technically a specialist? Great question. Does Tracer operate in short ranges? Yes. Does Tracer have mobility, enough mobility to be able to play on open maps? Yes. There's your skill. And is Tracer challenging to play? Yes. Yes. So Tracer, what you'll notice is that a lot of these specialists either have
feel like
no
some
range
of the specialists
or
benefit
nothing
from
but
having
range.
similar game plans to other characters, fitting into a group of sorts. Like Soy/Soldier, to help offset the problems with being a specialist.
Is there anything that isn't a specialist? Oh yeah, there's a lot of characters. I think we talked about Kiri Sojourn. There's a lot of characters. I mean, that's a great point. I think definitely all characters fall generally on either side of the spectrum, at least by a little bit. But there are characters that fall somewhere in between. I think Baptiste is a bit of more of a hybrid, right? I think Sojourn definitely more of a hybrid. Kiriko can be more of a hybrid, although I wouldn't describe her necessarily as such. Diva's kind of a hybrid, right? Ramatra can be a bit of a hybrid, at least on paper. Yeah. Right, exactly. Some specialist synergies can get out of hand. Example, Brig covering Ana's weaknesses arguably too well. Right, but us being able to clarify that if Brig was to be OP, it would be through something like that. So what we would need to do is we wouldn't want to indiscriminately nerf Brigitte. We would want to nerf Brigitte's ability to pocket other people's weaknesses. And honestly, maybe buff something else. Buff Brig's damage, but nerf her ability to burst armor pack as Zenyatta. You guys get, I'm not saying that that's what's needed right now, but that gives us the context of this, how to actually balance the game. Widowmaker is awful. Venomine is useless. Her SMG is not very good. So if you're going to adjust how Widowmaker functions, you have to keep that in mind. Would Doom be a hybrid? Yeah, Doom can function in more situations, again, because he has the mobility. And mobility is a big thing. We'll talk more about that later. Mobility is what allows characters to be functionable in different situations. So maybe it's less about making hybrids and instead avoiding caricature heroes all along the spectrum. So maybe it's okay to have specialists with actually relatively simple gameplay loops, as long as those specialists have ways of counterplaying their weaknesses, right? Like I can outplay dive or brawl characters as Ana if I play well, and giving other people ways to outplay their strengths, right? Like, but Ana cannot easily outplay me all the time. Yeah, a hybrid because of the movement, yes. Venture has limitations with their movement, but Venture's mobility with Drill Dash and even the verticality with their dig is what prevents Venture from being a failed hero design, in my opinion. When am I going to oil up for the chem? Good question. Well, Hog is an interesting one because Hog actually got worse. You guys ready for this one? The Hog rework was such a failed rework because not only did he have the same gameplay loop, he actually lost the ability to be relevant outside of his weaknesses or outside of his strengths because there was a very important Roadhog change. What was the change, right? You guys are thinking, oh, it was the vape change. Now that was a buff, right? It was the right click, right? Because he lost the range with his right click. One of Roadhog's weaknesses is that he's a slow character, but at least he had a little bit of range, a little bit of poke. When he lost his right click, his little, like, if you were to draw like a Venn diagram here of what situations or what Roadhog can do, it shrunk. So even though he got better at doing those things because of his vape change and because of his trap, he became even more of a specialist. The rework actually went in the wrong direction because Roadhog already was the tank buster with a relatively simple gameplay loop. Now he's the tank buster with a relatively simple gameplay loop, but you don't even have, you have even less justification to make plays now. Well, we talked about the weaknesses of the specialist already, Doc. You'd have to go back and go over it. I don't want to rehash it over again. But okay, let's open the chat up again. I'm gonna grab some water in a second here. So let me let's look at it again. So specialists, are specialists healthy or unhealthy? Does the concept of having more generalist heroes destroy the unique fun of Overwatch? Because I do think that you need characters that feel unique and look unique and play uniquely. But from a fundamental gameplay loop perspective, is this just being is this a necessary evil? Is it short-sighted? Does it destroy the personality of the game? What do you guys think? No problem, Tyler. Doing good. You, man? How are you? Nice, dude. Nice. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Junker Queen is the best designed Overwatch 2 hero. Notice how with Kiriko and Sojourn, the problems that arise are mostly balance. In Malga, Bastion, etc., the only problems are not only balance related, but the lack of dynamics in the kit lead to a lack of counterplay or too strong of counterplay, either being countered or countering them. Strengths and weaknesses are fine, but they should never reach the extreme. They should always counterplay on both sides. Malga is the only real miss in Overwatch 2. Lifer is the most flawed, but has a means to cater to a specific type of player and offers a decent skill curve. The rest are poorly tuned or have one problematic ability. Specialists are needed for the variety of Overwatch's love for, but extremes are not needed. Ashe is fine, Widow is not. I think a lot of people say that Ashe is what Widowmaker should have been, and I think that that's a great way of looking at it. Because even, and a lot of these things I think come to mind to me when I coach the characters. Because when you're coaching how to optimally play a character, you skip all the bull crap, right? You get right to the heart of the situation. And what you realize with Ashe is you talk about a character that takes a sight lane and pokes. But sometimes when you have dynamite and versus certain comps, you want to close the distance because like an Ana Zen, you can really wreck. And then Bob, right? Bob really encourages more short sight lines. And your mobility is limited, but at least it's enough to allow you to give you some vertical. You guys see what I'm saying? So like Ashe is still not a great character in terms of Overwatch 2, but compared to Widowmaker in terms of like the choices that you have to make and playing into there's so much more nuance to it, and it's a lot of fun. I don't think they're unhealthy. Some of the best characters are ones like Winston, ones like Reinhardt. They have little functionality outside of their niche, but they're good at what they do. And I think that the thing with the Reinhardt is like, how do you play Reinhardt into spam? How do you play Reinhardt into dive? How do you play Reinhardt into brawl? And while Reinhardt is definitely a specialist, there are ways to do it into all of those situations. Partly because of his pen, partly because of his shield. And so Reinhardt is a specialist, certainly, in some way, shape, or form. But he's not an extreme. Hot take, Junkrat, Summer takes go. I don't think that's a hot take. Specialists are unhealthy, but a necessary spice of life. Unless the characters are literally all the same, they're always going to be heroes we think of specialists. I don't think we want oops all soldiers. This ain't caught. True. In fact, part of the reason why I'm playing Overwatch in the first place is because this isn't COD, right? One of the things I think maybe you guys, I've talked about this before, is one of the things that initially appealed to me about Overwatch is the variety of characters, and the way that they all felt was totally different, because that was something that I loved about playing Halo at a friend's house and doing like random rollouts, is that like there's like 20 different guns, and they're just so much fun. You kind of changed my mind with the last convo. I think specialists are good in a way, but there needs to be a bit of a lean towards a hybrid for the sake of having a bit of options. And I think this is also ties in a little bit with Overwatch 2 and how it's more like everyone needs a little bit of mobility. I think the healthiest demonstration of hybridization is mobility. You know? Yeah, I think that's probably the most consistent way of providing some sort of hybrid. Because like even, let's say, giving Roadhog a little bit of mobility would allow him to overcome his short-term limitations in more situations. Specialists are okay to have an extent. They're not okay to have a tank, though, because there's only one. I actually disagree. I understand your logic. I think as long as tanks have ways of counterplaying their weaknesses, like a Reinhardt can only play up close, but he has a shield and speed to enable them to get close, I think it's okay. I think a lot of the problems with tanks that we think of as specialists is not the specialist tanks. It's the tank buster tanks. That's a specialty that I think should not be allowed. Does that make sense? I actually think that there's a lot of tanks like Winston and Wrecking Ball and Ryan that are definitely more OTP-ish, like less like they're not extremes by any means, but they are a little bit specialist. But the tanks, those are historically fine. It's the tanks like Malga and Roadhog and Orisa that we don't like, and those all have one thing in common. Their specialty is tank busting. Especially is tank busting. Using the definition, fundamentals of characters are too unique, special ability to being unfun. It's very limited cool mechanics. It's very hard to come with that. Hero fantasy, you don't want to go. Yeah. I think Overwatch 1 came out with very specialized characters. I agree with that 100%, which made everything new and unique, but as it wants to be more competitive and integrate esports, it needs more specialization to reduce frustration. I don't think it's just about integrating esports. I think as people play, what gets people to start playing the game is the uniqueness. But the more that you play, the more that you realize that the uniqueness wears off and it needs to be a good product underneath. That's part of the reason why we all have a lot of nostalgia goggles about early Overwatch, because there were so many new and unique experiences left to be had. But once you've had most of those unique experiences, you just want a good game. You just want something that's fun to play. And unfortunately, a lot of the flavor wears off. Let me give you guys a weird analogy. That crazy guy or girl that you dated, right? Super charismatic, fun, silly, a little bit obnoxious, but was like really fun to be around. You marry that person, it wears off, and you realize that this person is obnoxious. You need to have some sort of quality in terms of the person that you're spending. Doesn't mean that you need somebody boring and straightforward. Me and my wife are like super weird, right? Like not super weird, but we're very silly. But I didn't marry my wife just because she was super fun and crazy and we had a lot of fun together, but also because like there was like integrity and quality there and we had good long conversations. You have to be really careful about that, right? What's super quirky, the quirky goth girl that you had a crush on in high school, that's going to get real old in a couple of months. Shut up, Matt. So, I think it's very easy to be nostalgic about the good old times, but, that stuff wears off. The novelty of Overwatch 1 alone was what catapulted it to success. Specialists either neither healthy nor unhealthy. It depends on what they do. See, that's great right there. What do they specialize and how strong is that? Specialists happen naturally when designing a character because you can't give everything to a character. Yes. Noticon. I will be egotistical and say that if nothing else, I've been consistent. When they did the early release for Malga, I was very vocally negative. Very. Major weaknesses to poke damage. I thought he was quite bad because this is before they buffed or nerfed his hitbox and he was really bad. And I think Yeatle was another content creator who put out a very good video on the flaws with Malga just from the weekend playing him. But yeah. Keep in mind, it's also not because content creators are idiots. It's also sometimes can be hard. It can be hard. Now, I kind of disagree with Venture. I think Venture has some negative gameplay loops, which we talked about, where there's a little bit too much of a leniency, tendency to rely on burst damage, and maybe some fundamental flaws in that. But I think Venture's not too bad. I don't think Venture. Yeah, I lost it over Suzu. I lost it off of Life Grip, just from the hero release stuff. I think this is where like being a coach has an advantage. Like you yeah. Anyway. Are arguably more healthy than specialists until you reach level hyper specialist. I think generalizing heroes, damaging the hero fantasies, is not the way to go when trying to make a healthier Overwatch. I think if anything, we need to be focusing on alternate playstyles and highlighting them. Lean on what makes Overwatch special. Yeah, that is true. You don't want to make Overwatch just a generic, balanced Call of Duty first-person shooter by any means. What is Stefano smoking? Oh my gosh, you guys are cringe. How is it the Patreons that are the most mentally damaged? All right, let's move on to our next question here. We're not done yet, guys. We only have a few more, but I have so many things that we have to talk about today. Read the last paragraph. I think we might want to reflect on what defines Overwatch, because I think the answer is how to make healthy Overwatch lies in understanding what Overwatch is and how people interact with how Overwatch is. Yeah. We think that you're smart. That's a significant enough sign, surely. Who shares your 3-hour kiss? No, sorry. This guy's Old Lang signing in a YouTube stream or Twitch stream. Unreal, really. Unreal. So, when it comes to the specialist versus generalist, the question, is it the hero's fault or the ability's fault? You get what I'm saying? Like, for example, Lifeweaver just heals, okay? But is that Life Grip's fault? Is that Petal's fault? Or is there something wrong with the character? Cassidy Hinder. Really, really, really bad ability, right? It's a very specialist ability. But is that Cassidy's fault, or is that the ability's fault? Let's talk about dynamic versus static, all right? The idea of dynamic versus static, let's define dynamic in our context, and that's basically having to make choices about what you do, because what you do has choices, right? So you can do this with this ability, or you can do that with this ability. You can do this with this character, or you can do that with that character. Widowmaker just shoots people from distance, but also diving deeper into the kits and finding out what is it that makes abilities dynamic. Static means that you really only do one thing and can only really make one choice. Simple gameplay loops. So here's the thing, guys. I have changed my opinion. I was sitting in the shower yesterday thinking about this, right? And I have changed my opinion. I don't think in most cases there is such a thing as a static ability, an unhealthy static ability. In my opinion, you have to consider how it functions in the entire hero's kit. Now, I'm going to eat crow here because this is something that I have in my notebook that the developers told me face to face at the Content Creator Summit. They said they don't look at static versus dynamic abilities. They look at how it functions in the entire kit. And I was a little skeptical of that, but the more I think about it, the more I think that they're right. Well, what's the problem with Fortify, right? Fortify, now I do agree with you. There are some abilities that are objectively just bad. Fortify is probably one of them. But one of the problems with Fortify is because Orisa doesn't really have a gameplay loop that encourages offensive pressure, Fortify is mostly just used to survive. Well, let me give you guys an example. I'm going to blow your mind, all right? Let's talk about shields. Would you guys describe Rein Shield as being skillful or dynamic? Blocking damage, blocking cooldowns, enabling aggression, defending you? I would say yes. When we talk about dynamic, it does serve basically one purpose, but how you can use that. Like, this is the thing. It only really does one thing. It blocks damage and cooldowns, right? That's not dynamic, right? But how you use it is very dynamic. You could go aggressive, you can go defensive, a little bit of both, depends on the situation. But here's the question. Why would you describe initially Reinhardt shield as dynamic? But do you guys remember Overwatch 1 Orisa? You throw their shield at the floor and then you'd shoot? I even have the muscle memory of just pressing E, you know what I'm saying? Would you guys describe Orisa shield as particularly dynamic? What do you guys think? Not particularly, right? Not particularly. It's a shield, though. Why? It's the same thing. It's a shield. And it was not the deployable, in my opinion. In fact, Orisa could put her shield wherever she wanted. That's a dynamic. That's cool. But it just didn't do, because the entire kit did not complement choice. So the problem wasn't necessarily Orisa shield. The problem was the Orisa kit. Now, you can't, that's like saying that, like, I'm a really nice person, I'm just mean, you know what I'm saying? You know, a character is a combination of their kits, but what I'm saying is that sometimes one aspect of the kit isn't necessarily unhealthy, it's the combination of the problems. You guys get what I'm saying? There's nothing inherently static about shields. And you guys ready for a hot take? There's nothing inherently static or non-dynamic about crowd control. You hear me? Crowd control can and often does have a lot of dynamics. Now that's a hot take, but if you think about it, it's true. Because most crowd control has the choice of either an offensive use or defensive use or something in between. So let's compare the two. Ana, Sleep Dart. Why is Ana Sleep Dart generally regarded as a pretty good cooldown, a pretty dynamic cooldown? Lots of choice with how you can use Ana Sleep Dart. If you've ever coached an Ana player, you know this. Because you can yeet Sleep Dart from across the map and get value, right? But you could also save to use it defensively, or you could throw it on tank, or you could sleep again, right? And even now, even sleeping a tank, while it might be easier gameplay loop, might not be the most effective way to win fights. It's not just the fact that it's skillful to use, but using it in one way might mean that you're paying the cost elsewhere. You have to choose. Brig Whip Shot is also not a bad example either, where it's damage there, but it also it's vulnerability. So compare Sleep Dart with Hinder, because Hinder is one of those rare abilities which I think is objectively a bad ability design. A bad ability design. I actually think Hinder is almost irredeemable. But what's the problem with Hinder? Compare Hinder to Sleep Dart. It's not a skill shot, first off, not really. How do you use Hinder aggressively? How do you use Hinder aggressively? How do you set up plays with Hinder? Almost impossible. It's not even very good at winning duels. Like back in the day, you could go and roll Flash, and that would allow you to either stun the person for follow-up, or it would allow you to follow up with damage. Now, Hinder is just kind of something you throw while you're shooting, right? And it can even throw off your aim. Sometimes it's better to not even use Hinder. You guys get what I'm saying? And now this is the juice. You guys ready for this one? What if we gave Hinder to Tracer? No, wait, no. What if we gave Hinder to Winston? What if we gave... You guys know what I'm saying? Think about it. How would a Winston use Hinder? How would a Tracer use Hinder? Just bear with me. Would you use it to save your life? Would you use it to win duels? Would you use it to prevent people from chasing you down? It's still bad on those characters, but do you see how like all of a sudden you got to think about it a little bit more? There's probably a little bit more dynamic so that it's still a bad ability, yes. But all of a sudden you could even use Hinder on Winston to prevent a Kiriko from TPing away. So sometimes it's the ability. Sometimes, more often, it's the kit. And just to prove that point, whenever you hate an ability, throw it on another character with a totally different gameplay loop and see how it feels in your brain. Let me prove that to you. And this is where I'm really cooking, okay, guys? Hold tight. Where is my notes here? I want to make sure I'm following the order here, okay? Okay. You ready for a hot take? You guys ready for a hot take? What if you gave Life Grip to Kiriko?
How would I use Hinder on Brig? You can't escape my combo here.
What if you gave Life Grip on Kiriko? Do you see what I'm saying? Life Grip is a universally despised ability. How would you use Life Grip? Go ahead. How would you use it? What would you do with it? Would you use it to save people's lives? Yes. But what else could you do with it? Because Kiriko has the positional choices, you could reposition people on off angles and flanks and high grounds all the time, because that's Kiriko's gameplay loop. Her gameplay loop would make Life Grip an actually broken ability, more so than it already is. It would be so OP. It would be so overpowered because of the gameplay loop. It would actually go from being universally hated to being universally hated well, actually not universally, okay, it would probably be universally hated, but it would be ridiculously strong and much more interesting. Broken, but very interesting. In fact, there was an SVB video. You guys remember the SVB video where he swore up and down, and I think it was partly for the video, that people just didn't understand Lifeweaver. Let me find SVB Lifeweaver. And I have a lot of respect for SVB, but I think he missed this one. I think he missed with this one. But it brings an interesting point. I spent 7 days learning Lifeweaver, and basically that's what SVB learned. It was basically like, I think Lifeweaver is good. You just need to take positions and pull people to those positions. The problem and why that was a flawed idea is that that's not Lifeweaver's gameplay loop. He doesn't do that. The rest of his kit completely differs with that. Pedal to an extent helps, but really Lifeweaver does not do that. So Life Grip is only used in one way. You get what I'm saying? So whenever you're looking at like healthy and non-healthy abilities, you can't really just look at the ability itself. You have to look at the gameplay loop and whether it actually adds dynamics to the gameplay loop. Remember, Ryan's shield is a very one-dimensional ability. But when you throw it on a 2-3-dimensional kit, all of a sudden shield is what allows people to make choices. You guys get what I'm saying? Mobility, the key thing with the interesting thing here is mobility is inherently dynamic, and that's why I've always been a fan of mobility, because mobility allows you to go in, go out, be aggro, then disengage, play safe, then go aggro. And that's why, like, without always mobility creeping necessarily, mobility always introduces dynamic choice and skill. It is impossible to have mobility that doesn't introduce skill and dynamics, because it opens up your choices of how you can position. When you play chess, the pawn versus the knight or the horse or whatever, the knight and the horse always has more choices, because you could L here or L there or L here. Because you have more choices, the character has more dynamics, the character has more skill expression. Nobody, in a chessboard, nobody wants to be the pawn, even if it is balanced. And so my hot take here is that shields, crowd control, they're not necessarily bad. They can be dynamic within the context of the kit, right? In a character with Cassidy's gameplay loop, Flash Grenade was annoying, but at least dynamic and allowed you to choose between, do I want to set an aggressive play or save it for a more defensive purpose? Myopic abilities can be dynamic in the global kit. Genji Deflect is a great one, right? How do you use Genji Deflect? When people are shooting at you, okay? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's not that deep, right? But because you could position however you want, and because you have high mobility, you can use your deflect on main, on tank, to win a duel, to allow you to aggressively push or flank or off angle for ego or for defensive purposes. Yes, DePriest. All this ties in together. I don't think it's. There's a reason why we're having this conversation all at once, because I actually don't think it's physically possible to have this conversation, in any of these conversations, necessarily in total isolation. And I have done this before in isolation, but I think that I think it's a mistake. I think you have to tie all these topics together. So usually hero design, and not just an ability, is the problem. Fire Concussive Blast is a great example. Great for combos, great for setting up rockets, but it's also, if you use it, that's your best defensive cooldown. Yeah, so the whole point of this conversation is that we can't fixate on only dynamic kits. Dynamic abilities are great, but you don't need, it's more about the dynamics of the kit, and sometimes simple abilities can do very well in kits. Am I in the creator program? Yes. I bragged about this earlier, guys, but from the creator program, one of my suggestions for some of the matchmaking thing, like a small thing, a very small thing, is going through because of my suggestion. I don't know if I'm allowed to leak it or not, so I won't. But there's a small suggestion that I made, so that was cool. When it goes live, I'll let you guys know what it was. It's a small thing, but hey, Kyle, what's up, mate? Okay, so let's talk about dynamic abilities. let's go back to our channel. We only have one more topic to discuss. Are dynamic abilities health necessary? What do you guys think? Are there any abilities that you think are fundamentally flawed? Fortify comes up. Cast Grenade comes up. Thanks, Henry. I appreciate it. So what do you guys think? What are the fundamentally flawed characters? See, we even talked about Life Rip, right? Very myopic ability, but the problem is more of the fact that it doesn't work with Life Weaver. Hack has dynamics, denying or offensive priorities. Doesn't mean that's fun to play with. Immortality is a great answer. Immortality is a great answer, and probably one of the best abilities to come to mind. Because if you think about what is Baptiste's gameplay loop, he doesn't proactively immortality field. You don't go out there and make plays with immortality field. You sit there, you shoot, you shoot, you shoot. Immortality does not work very well. It is a strictly defensive use. And not just strictly defensive, but it's only used in instances of burst damage. This is why when we had a discussion with, what was it, Samito and Yeedle, I think we had a group up podcast, and we talked about the damage reduction field and how a damage reduction field would actually be so much more interesting, even for a tank trade. Imagine not saving immortality field in a tank trade, but throwing it early so that your tank preserved armor and also pulled. You guys get what I'm saying? And I think there's a lot of discussion about, like, is that just like a mouthful, But anyway, long story short, turrets. Non-dynamic abilities make the balance hard because they need to be really good at the one thing they do to justify their existence. True. Tracer's undoubtedly a specialist. I think Kit's here. Yes, of course. Suzu's example is hard to bait out because it only has one use on a super mobile tiny hitbox character that can play safe and hold until nade is thrown. Rez. No, Rez is definitely... Rez is nothing. And the reason why Rez is so bad too is because Rez generally is useless because Mercy's movement and or defensive capabilities are so bad that 90% of Rezes are either unstoppable or impossible to pull off. It's not just an unhealthy ability, but the kit of Mercy does not allow her to go in aggressively in Rez unless she is Valk. And even then, it doesn't work very well. But then because of her pocket playstyle, a lot of Rezes happen behind walls that you can't even stop. You get what I'm saying? So 90% of the time, Rez, there is no choice or skill or decision-making with Rez because the rest of her kit, it really only does one thing and does one thing. Be curious to hear why you don't agree, Virulence. I'm curious. Sometimes the number of times you can have an ability has an effect on how dynamic is considered. 1 Tracer Blink versus having 3, or a Genji Dash Reset. Junkrat Trap and maybe Hog, right? But static abilities can exist as long as they serve a purpose on the hero's kit. An example could be Steel Trap. You take it out of the Junkrat, it is worthless, but on Junkrat, it serves a purpose. It allows them to zone people for certain movement paths, and that's true. I love that there's people that literally just say Trap and then argue for Trap. I mean, it proves that this conversation is far from simple, right? Like, I certainly don't have all the answers here. Nobody does. But I think it's worth having these conversations. Moira Fate seems like it should be dynamic, but in practice it's not because its cooldown is so short. It makes Moira way more survival than she should be. Yeah, the one benefit of Moira's Fate is because it is mobility. You can use it aggressively or defensively, so it does have that going for it. But I understand what you're saying. It's just survivability and then more survivability. Stalling abilities like Maze, Ice Block, and Venture and Ground shouldn't stall the point, okay? I think having only one tank breeds the need for dynamic abilities for both the tank and everyone else. Losing the support of a second tank makes heroes with more static capabilities harder to get value out of. Additionally, from a balancing standpoint, I think it's much easier to build and balance dynamic kits than static kits. That is really true. That's why I liked Venture as a design, because there are so many knobs to turn that you can adjust. There are so many choices. You can enjoy how long it takes to burrow, how long burrow lasts, does burrow stall, not to mention all the bugs of the character. How much damage does burrow do at minimum damage, maximum damage, how long does it charge, how high does it go, how much damage does drill dash do, how easy is it the combination, how far does it go, what about the movement lock, what about the boop distance, what about the primary fire distance, range, and damage, how many bullets does Venture have in their clip, How far does the ultimate go? How much damage does the ultimate go? How long does it last? How high can drill dash go? How much damage does melee do, and how much of it is DOT and how much of it is damage? Footsteps, right? Footsteps, exactly, right? So even the passive from shields, when shields generate, how shields generate, how much shields generate. How an ability can be executed should be comparable for the value that it can get. I don't think any ability is inherently dynamic or static. I think internal interactions are where the dynamics arise. If Orisa's gun heat was a bigger factor, see our Tank Reaper project, yeah. If Fortify and Spin interacted with that more, Fortify would actually be fine. If Livebearer had more positioning options, then Grip would be quite possibly fine. Maybe it'd even be a nerf on lifesaving front. If Mercy's res was less binary, and such as due to variable cast time, create new dynamics, I also think that many interesting dynamics arise from interactions between characters. Cardiac Overdrive is actually one of the coolest abilities, and it's not really a dynamic hero, but I love the potential dynamics it could have with other heroes if Malga himself had better internal interactions. Are we considering ultimates? Not as much ultimates, but yeah, it's probably something we should consider, but just for the interest of time, not as much. Cheers, Artifice. It is true that balancing static abilities makes it harder. How do you improve Steel Trap without making it too annoying and too strong in low rings? Hey, Reaper Man. That is true. That is true. Yeah, Ceiling Enjoyer. I think the developers, for the most part, know where to listen to ideas. I think that like that is a skill that you definitely need to have as developers, is know where to listen. And I think for the most part that is something that is, I don't think the developers are too, I don't think that I can really point to an immediate recent example where they listen to like a really stupid idea, right? I think for the most part, yeah. Dynamic abilities can be interactable, blockable, matrix. Armor pack is a lot less interesting if it's not interactable in the way of the target. That's true. Okay. That's true. Let's go to our last point here. Last point. And this is a bit of a departure, but I think it's an important one. Because while we're complaining about hero designs and so on, let's talk about what is meta and why certain hero designs and certain things can be so annoying, right? We're getting a lot of hair cam today? Yeah, sure. Okay. Sorry, I'm just so tall. What is meta? I think the question needs to be, is there a healthy or a happy meta possible? What's the line between balance and variety, right? A healthily balanced game isn't necessarily even the game that's most interesting to play or the one that's going to be keeping players in. I think variety is important. And again, that's one of those things that on the notebook, Alec in person told me that they value variety. And I think that somebody like me can look at that and be a little bit annoyed to an extent, and rightfully so, because I think so, because there are certain characters that I think that don't ever deserve to be meta. Like, at what cost are we sacrificing variety on, right? Or sacrificing our sanity on? But I will say, players are also way more likely to be influenced by small strengths and things snowball. I think variety is important, right? Like, we want things to be different. Different things make things interesting to play. The problem is that obviously not all heroes are created alike, right? Players are also way more likely, like I said, to be influenced by small strengths, right? And things snowball. For example, we talked about this on stream. I was joking that I was concerned with the Orisa nerf that we were going to see a lot more Malga and that we're going to see a lot more Roadhog because, people don't like those characters. So I made a joke that if I just say, hey guys, DPS passive got buffed by 5%, Roadhog is dead, that even though that wasn't true, people would probably read that, listen to that, and then decide that Roadhog was trash. And then every single time they play with the Roadhog, all they would see is all the weaknesses of the Roadhog. People are very open to suggestion. I remember that we used to see this in Overwatch 1 all the time, which was notorious for doing these like tiny little patch changes, like these 0.5 second changes or these 2 damage changes or 1 damage or 0.5 damage changes that were really unimpactful. But the visibility of them definitely changed what people tried. because it just felt like it should have mattered, right? Like surely it matters, and that influenced people. And the problem is though is that that stuff snowballs all the time, and it snowballs quickly. Psychological warfare, right? And to make matters even worse, while we're talking about meta, high rank players / influencers really influence lower rank and mid rank players, because they are the ones that you're going to watch. It's not that it's not malicious or even stupidity. They might be right. They might say, "Oh, this character's broken," and they're right. The problem is they're broken where they're at, and the average player, that's not their experience. And the problem is though is their experience if they're listening. If they're listening, it is their experience. And not only is this dangerous for meta, like balance and all that kind of stuff, it's dangerous for your enjoyment and an overall impression of the game. For example, how many of you guys have seen all the Steam reviews on Overwatch? How many of you guys have seen all LOL, Overwatch, r/games, little trash game? How many of those reviews are just parroting Moist Critical or whoever the other talking heads are? Legitimate complaints about Overwatch and Blizzard, but that are used by these influencers. And then those opinions are then parroted as if they were original thoughts. And not just parroted, but they influence the person's real enjoyment and perception of the game. Like, we're not just talking about like your opinion of the game. It's talking about like you log into the game, you are expecting to not have fun, and you will not have fun. And that happens inside Overwatch. If I have a podcast with Flats, and Flats says this game sucks, this meta sucks, it's bad, people are going to log into ranked, and they expect to have a bad time, and they are. That's how it goes. It's called the anchoring effect. There's a psychology behind this. There's a story here of once upon a time, professional realtors, okay? People that work in real estate. They were given houses to look at and then give their best estimates. And they were challenged, do not let our estimation of this house's value influence your opinion of the house's value. And they say, oh, no, we're professionals. We don't need to see what you think how much the house is valued. We don't need to. We're going to make our own opinions because we do this literally for our livelihood. It's our job. Well, they were shown the estimation for the house and then asked to form their own opinion. Well, these estimates of the house worth were purposefully inflated secretly. They were not the actual estimation. Then they had a group of real estate agents that were given the same task, but not shown the estimation of the house. And despite the fact that the real estate agents, the professionals, were told, do not let this influence it, the fact that they said, yeah, we're professionals, we're not going to be influenced by this thing, they were 41% correlation, 41% association, were influenced significantly by the external representation, despite being professionals. And if professionals are influenced by opinion, then how do you think your stupid plat players watching CarQ, Emong, and so on's tier list, how much do you think they're going to be influenced of their enjoyment and impression of the meta and the quality of the game? You get what I'm saying? So what you're saying is everyone listens to the top 1% except for the Blizzard. I mean, the Blizzard patch team definitely listens to the top 1%. I don't care what streamers will complain about. Do they listen as much as they quote unquote ought to? Maybe, maybe not. But they're definitely influenced. It's not even a negative thing. This is just normal, healthy psychology, but it is something to be aware of. Here's another thing, though. You guys ready for some sauce here? And I understand that I'm not immune to this. This is why I encourage you guys, whenever I do patch notes, to form your own opinions first before you even listen to my take. That way you don't get influenced by because you will be influenced by my take. It's unavoidable. And I try to be as balanced as possible. Again, I try to take my responsibility as seriously as I can. All right? Regardless, the other thing here, too, you guys ready for the sauce here? You guys ready for something really spicy? This isn't really even a hot take, but it is a little bit tough. Influencers are paid more the more extreme their opinion is. This goes about the quality of the game and the meta. The more extreme of an opinion you have, the more successful of a content creator you will be. Very high correlation. Because interaction farming, charisma, intensity of interaction is entertaining. Now, the best part about this is it's not even necessarily something devious. It's not even necessarily something that's done purposefully. It's unintentionally conditioned. Because I've dealt with this. Because whenever my patch note reactions are negative, they, without exception, do better on YouTube. Without exception. And not only that, the patch changes that are a lot more sus always have higher Twitch views. People are more likely to tune in to see Spilo lose his crap. Always. And so even if I wasn't paying attention to that, my subconscious is. The part of me that wants to eat, the part of me that would like to go to Disney World for the first time in like 6 years with my wife does. So what do you think that's going to affect me to do? Am I going to lie? No. But when in doubt, for some reason, my gut's going to say it's not good. You can't even avoid it. So you're unintentionally conditioning yourself to these more extreme opinions and more extreme communication. In addition to that, higher ranked players and bigger content creators are more influenced by smaller adjustments. Because a 1 second cooldown change on Orisa might break her in GM, but it probably won't break her in Plat. But I'm going to say Orisa's dead because it's definitely dead in GM. Because we're more likely to immediately leverage that change. So this is why, like, you just need to be very careful. And I'm saying this not to attack content creators. It's unavoidable. I'm guilty of it. I do my best to try to be objective about it, but it is literally impossible. I would consider myself to be one of the most objective opinion content creators, but it is a bit of a oxymoron. It's really not entirely possible. So just be aware of it. I'm encouraging you guys to take action against it by trying to form your own opinions about things first before you factor in my thoughts. So here's what we want when it comes to meta and the opinion of the game. Number one, this is more balance related. I do think it is smart to be cautious of buffing heroes that have immediate value floor issues. The problem with buffing a character like Malga, Orisa, whatever, is that it is very easy to immediately leverage their strengths rather than buffing a character like Winston, where like you could buff Winston's alt fire, and even if the indirect result is that a Winston is as strong as Malga, the majority of the player base is not going to be able to leverage it. And what happens is when we talk about the value of variety, when easy characters are buffed, that is the enemy of variety. Right? Because it is everybody can capitalize off of that, which then squashes dynamics, it squashes creativity, and it squashes the variety and fun of what makes Overwatch unique. So we need to be cautious of buffing heroes like Bastion, like Malga, that have immediate value floor, right? Dominate the meta in all ranks, bronze to top 500, and so on. I think we need to continue to rework and adjust bottom floor heroes to be more challenging and have healthier skill expression so that we can introduce more meta variety without feeling badly about it, right? Like, why is it so bad to have Malga in the meta? I wish that it wasn't. We should really try so that Malga is viable in the meta and not immediately abusable in Cancer. There's nothing, and I think we need to continue to change the meta over time with a bias towards characters with healthy skill expressions at the higher levels, so to influence player opinion. Here's the hot take, guys. Just as I'm trashing on content creators and higher ranked players, you ready for the real hot take? You do need a bias towards higher ranked players. You do. Not just for the philosophy of a more balanced game trickles down and, whatever, but because you have to cater to your loudest voices, because the loudest voices influence the population's opinion about the quality of the game significantly. There's your hot take. You do need to cater to lower ranks and mid ranks, and we talked about the noob hunter, the noob buster characters. But the real hot take is you actually do need to cater to high rank players, more so than low rank players. Well, the problem is, Gulag Boy, it's not even about the esport. Generally, esports doesn't matter that much because the esport content creators are really, really small, at least in relation to people like Flats and Emong and so on. They're usually, at least in Overwatch, they are. But the content creators have to be happy. And I think we need to be cautious about buying all the opinions of talking heads, myself included. Form your own opinion first, as it will harm the accuracy of what you actually think. You see, the thing is this isn't just about being, we need to be less negative, because content creators are more negative. It's more about like, you might actually really hate something and kind of force yourself to play it because, it is good, right? It's good, right? So, form your own opinion. Form your accurate opinion of what you like. Yeah. I mean, the 6v6 example is great because I think that I am a big proponent of a lot of the strengths of 6v6. In fact, that's something that me and Samit are planning to have a discussion with, I think, next week. But because it's parroted in the way that it is and presented in the way that it is insufferable. And it makes people not want to like it because of the voice of how it's being said, not based off of the quality of the arguments. Yeah, Season 9 patch and early reaction versus reactions after playing was a really great example of that. Right, people freaked. Now, that was a good example of people went in with lower expectations but quickly changed their mind. People are not completely subjective, right? Ball, Tracer, Lucio, people like playing those characters. And the balance, I think, was relatively good. But obviously, how good was it versus just people's immediate knee-jerk reactions? It's kind of hard to say. I honestly like the devs. Yeah, same. I think being daring with changes is one of the biggest things. If you guys talk to like some of my earlier stuff, one of the earlier things I said is that you need to take risks, right? And historically, that was something that developers have not done. So that is something that I'm very grateful about. Okay. I'm not going to even open up questions for the meta stuff. I think it's just more food for thought. I don't think there's as much room for discussion, but I'm curious to see if you guys have any thoughts on this. These are the fatal flaws. I'm not really Overwatch, but just partially Overwatch, but game design, period. Thoughts?